What's going on, everybody? As always, for starters, the land acknowledgement. I'm recording this here on occupied Tiwa territory, otherwise known as Albuquerque, New Mexico. And together, let us continue this fight and struggle for indigenous and black liberation. And y'all already know your host, Zachariah Jazz, and this is It's Controversial. So today, I have something special for y'all. I'm going to be doing a segment here on Legacy Church and specifically on Steve Smotherman. As you might have seen or heard, Legacy Church is under fire right now for violating their requirements to operate as a 501c3 that is a nonprofit, and they did that by promoting two candidates for city council, and in being in open opposition to Mayor Keller and Michelle Lujan Grisham. So to help me decipher some of this sermon, I pulled some clips from the sermon that he did this, that he's under fire for. And to help me with that, I'm bringing along a guest who has knowledge of the church and Bible scripts. He is known only as the preacher. He preferred to stay anonymous in that way for personal reasons. So let's get started. So in the original recording of this, I had a topic that I wanted to talk about and cover with a guest speaker, but for some reason I couldn't get it to play. So I cut it from the segment. But after we wrapped up recording, I miraculously got it to play. And what it's talking about, I feel, connects with critical race theory. And Steve Smotherman is talking about religious culture change with on one of his sermons, and it's basically critical race theory in and of itself until the end, when he flips it all on its head. So here it is, essentially the core of critical race theory.
Frank, whatever the culture is, people don't like it because now they don't know how to relate to you. But if you want to walk with Christ, you got to do it right. You know, when I lived in Tehran, Iran, I close with this. When we lived in Tehran, Iran, one of the first things that happened when we were there, we went to a place called Gulf District where all the Americans hung out. There was no American bases. We were military. We just lived out in the middle of Tehran, Iran. And so it was my older brother who was about 17. My sister was 16. My other brother would have been about 15. I would have been 12, and my younger brother would have been 10. We were out getting a cab, because that's how you got around there. We couldn't drive. You couldn't drive unless you were at least 21 as an American, so, or if you're in the military. But so he couldn't drive like he could in America, so we had to take taxi cabs everywhere. So he's standing out there doing this with the taxi cab. You know, this is how you hitchhike. In America, how many of y'all know that? You know, that's what people do. They hitchhike like this. And so anyway, he's out there doing that, and no one's stopping. In fact, people are yelling at us and honking, screaming at us. And we're like, what is going on here? But no one would stop. Finally, this Iranian who knew English, he pulled over and said, hey, are you guys new here? And he goes, yeah, we just got here, man. He goes, what are you doing? He said, I'm trying to get a cab. But none of them will stop. And he said, well, you know why? We said, no, we don't know why. He said, this in Iran is the bird finger in America. So you are flipping off everybody driving by. And we're like, what? Culture. And so he said, well, how do I flag a cab? He goes, with your finger like this. So he left. My brother did this, and sure enough, a cab driver pulled right over, picked us up, and we went home. When you don't understand God's culture, it will cost you more than you're willing to pay. And when you refuse to change yours for his, you'll be out on a limb by yourself. And then you'll always wonder, why isn't no one stopping? Why isn't nobody helping? Why is everybody treating me like this? You'll always wonder those things. Thank God people can stop by your life and say, if you'll do it this way, then you'll receive God's blessing. It is up to you which culture you adapt to.
And now, let me introduce our guest speaker, the preacher. So, as I said, with me today is the preacher, but we'll refer to him as, say hello to the folks, preacher. Well, right on, okay.
Oh, I think I lost you there.
Oh, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay, perfect. Let me move my phone a little bit closer. So, let's get started. Here is the first clip that we'll go ahead and take a listen to. Let me know if you can hear this.
Go vote till December 4th because we need people
I can't hear
on
that.
the city council. We need people like her to make sure this crazy
Let me start that over.
you live over there to Eubank west of I-25. You're in District 7. And
Can you hear that?
Yeah, I can hear that. Thank you.
Okay. So this part is where what he's under fire for right now. This is the initial where he promotes the candidates for city council, and I believe he mentions his open opposition to Mayor Keller, I believe, or Michelle Lujan Grisham. I'm not sure, but so we'll go ahead and
actually mentioned both. Yeah.
yeah. So we'll go ahead and listen to this.
Governor Grisham, the little tyrant.
Yeah, exactly, right? That's what they love to call people. Yeah, so we'll go ahead and give this a listen, and then let us know what he did wrong and what could possibly happen as a result.
I'm encouraging us all. Listen, early voting is open now. Go vote till December 4th because we need people like her on the city council. We need people like her to make sure this crazy guy they call mayor doesn't continue to push his agenda. And by the way, you know, OSHA suspended the mandatory vaccine for businesses of 100 or more. And so they're backing up because people are pushing back. And so listen, we can keep voting in the knuckleheads. And if you voted for them, that's on you. I'm not going to be accountable for that. You will. These people hate God. They're for everything the Bible teaches us to be against. And so we have a chance maybe to put someone in there that can change the course of our city. Thank God the voters were smart enough to vote down that stadium. That was going to cost us. But I don't know why we're not, I'm going to say this, I don't know why we're not all in Albuquerque smart enough to vote down all the bonds. Why don't we hold people accountable? You already have money, do those. And why do we need more libraries? I have a phone. You know, when I was a kid, we bought encyclopedias. We always had I don't need them anymore. I have more than that on that little phone over there. And if you really knew who was using some of those libraries most of the time, you wouldn't be voting for them. It sounds good, though. Everything sounds good. So Lori's running. Its election is December 7th. She has a table in the foyer. She'll be out there to shake hands, answer questions. Do you know a lot about the book of Revelations? No, I'm kidding you. I play. I always say, no, she does. Her friend does. So anyway, no, I'm kidding you. But go ask her what she believes. That's why they're here. You get an opportunity, take it when you can, because a lot of times we don't get to speak to them. And so go get a feel for yourself. She'll be out there, and I hope we change Albuquerque. Her and what is the other city councilor's name? Renee Grout in District 9. She's enough. Listen, we got Dan Lewis. Dan Lewis is my city councilor. So Dan Lewis, we got him voted in my district.
He's not even hiding it anymore.
Voted in. I'm telling you guys, it becomes something different. And then the next year in the midterms and the governor's race, hopefully we get rid of this person up there. And we change New Mexico. We need a change. I mean, how many of y'all like the prices at the gas pump? How many of y'all noticing that there's the food costs have gone high?
It has nothing to do with
I
it.
mean, it's crazy. I mean, if you like
Yeah,
that,
exactly.
then so
You know,
be it.
like most preachers, like many preachers, I want to say many instead of most, and I apologize. You know, Pastor Smotherman, he likes to argue in these false equivalencies and logical fallacies. Like, a normal person that understands how the world works can tell you flat out that, the government has no control over the price of oil. That's controlled privately. Those are, OPEC and Shell and ExxonMobil and all the rest of them. They decide the price of the oil based on law of supply and demand. The government has nothing to do with that.
Right. It's
right?
Yeah. They're not the ones that are selling it. It's the corporations that are out there, getting the oil, that are responsible for that. Even people that are like overseas, companies overseas that we get oil from, are responsible for that.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It's not the American government. President Biden has nothing to do with that.
Absolutely.
Now, I'm not going to say that President Biden is the greatest president we've ever had. He has his faults, but all people do.
Yeah,
right?
And definitely more than just a few.
Pastor Smotherman, with Pastor Smotherman and his diatribe there, an endorsement of those two candidates, quite frankly, they violate two things. One, they violate, federal law, the Johnson Amendment of 1965. We're going to talk about that for a second because it's really important.
Absolutely.
At the time, President Johnson actually introduced the Johnson Amendment while he was a senator. What had happened was there was a very wealthy oil/rancher baron in Texas that ran a very conservative nonprofit group, and they were concerned about the treaty-making powers of the president. So they tried to dump a whole bunch of money in, right? And that's where the Johnson Amendment came from. And the Johnson Amendment said, look, if you want to be a 501c3, be a 501c3, a nonprofit, but you cannot endorse a specific politician. And that's taken to mean in a lot of other places, like the National Evangelical Association, preach the issues, not the person, right? So if you're against abortion, that's fine. You can be against that all you want, but you can, preach why it's wrong. You just can't preach who you need to vote for. That would try to end that sort of thing, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
But if we look at it from a more theological background, Romans 13, 1 through 7 kind of covers that whole idea of like civil government. And when we look at that, Romans 13 basically says, we have a civil government and it should be honored. It says right here, even in his own version of the Bible, let every person be subject to the governing authorities, right? For there is no authority except from God, and those which exist have been put in place by God. Now, if we look at a literal meaning of that, right, then we have to assume that there's a difference between civil governments and religious ideologies. And civil governments are to be honored because God put those leaders in place by divine intervention, if you will, and guiding the hand of the voter.
Right,
that makes sense. So
yeah, absolutely.
He even contradicts his own version of the Bible with this.
Right, because basically it's like the people put these people in positions that by God's will, right?
Exactly. God touched that person with the desire to run for office, and God touched those voters and urged those voters to vote for that person, which is fine. You can do that. I don't have an issue with that. If you believe that, politics, civil politics is divinely inspired, that's your own deal, and I'm not going to fault you for it. But you can't turn around and tell people what to do. Because by proxy, aren't you telling God what he should or should not have done? And I don't know where Pastor Smotherman got his degree in ordination, but I know in my world, you don't question those sorts of things.
Right. Because,
if
anything
supposed to have infinite knowledge and power, you don't question.
Right, absolutely. Because, that's the whole point, right? Because you're doing God's will, you're God-fearing people, you're not supposed to sit here and say, hey, God, that was the wrong choice. We shouldn't have voted for that person. Exactly.
Yeah, if we're going to take if you want to take the opinion that, God ordained the people to lead our civil government, then you can't really question that.
Right, and because, that's it's completely backwards. It's so contradictory.
Yeah, you see, the thing is he tries to give us a very literal interpretation of the Bible. That whole, the amplified version of the Bible, which is what he's using, was created in the early 1900s. And it's a translation, if you will, of the American Standard Version of the Bible. And when they did this, they added words here and there, and they played with the punctuation and typography of it. And when we do that, they changed the meanings of some things. But it's very clear, even in the Amp Bible, Romans 13 very clearly says, don't question. We have our civil government for a reason, right? Now, oddly enough, some people in that vein will take that exact same, passage and say that, it's the responsibility of the government to protect us from, the evils of immigrants and this and that and the other. But that's a way far. That's a stretch.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, if these people are elected, it's God's plan, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think later on in that sermon, he blames the spike in COVID on immigrants, and that I think is just, it's a tragedy, and it's dangerous.
I'm pretty sure I clipped that too. Let's continue on with this clip. I think there's only like a minute left, and then we'll get on to the next one. It's about 2 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see.
We got mad at a guy because we didn't like his personality, but his policies helped our lives.
Let's talk about Trump.
And now here we go. Buyer's remorse, I guess. Hey, listen.
My question for that is, whose lives did he improve?
Yeah, not mine.
Did your life improve?
Nope.
I don't make enough money for my life to have been improved.
Not at all. I mean, thanks for signing the the unemployment and the stimulus or whatever, cool, thanks for that, but I mean, how long did that really even help?
And I know you're going to make me pay taxes on that, next come April 15th.
Yeah, exactly.
For some of you, this is going to be maybe freak you out a little bit, because I'm going to deal with a statement that we use. I've used it. So many people I know have used it. That's not biblical. Are you ready? Have you heard it said, we are to love the sinner but hate the sin? How many have said it? Believe it? Okay, now let me tell you. It's not in the Bible. It's not biblical. It's not even close to biblical. In fact, when you believe that, it causes you to compromise the very things you say you believe. Well, if I love them, then I need to do this, and if I love them, I need to do that. Nowhere does it say it in the Bible. In fact, St. Augustine and Mahatma, is that how you say it?
That was intentional.
Gandhi are the ones
who
started it. Not Jesus, not God, not the Holy Scriptures. So today I'm going to go through and show you how unbiblical it is. We get caught up in these statements and they sound so good. I've even had people say...
So that was the end of that clip. What was he saying right there at the end? Let's decipher that real quick.
I tried to decipher that on my own, and it kind of blurred out on me really quickly. And I have to disagree entirely. The concept of hating the sin and loving the sinner, it goes back to St. Augustine. And St. Augustine is probably one of the greatest philosophical theologians, in the church, in the history of the church, the Christian church. He started way back before, the free Catholic period. But, St. Augustine, he sort of based it off of Matthew 7:1, which, in the American Standard Version, basically says, judge not lest you be judged. But in their version, it agrees even there. Do not judge and criticize and condemn others unfairly with an attitude of self-righteous superiority, as though assuming the office of a judge, so that you will not be judged unfairly. Didn't he just judge a whole bunch of people?
Yeah, that's absolutely what he did. Absolutely.
He said all of this stuff, breaking, against Romans 13 and the Johnson Amendment, and, he hammers, Mayor Keller and, Democrats as being godless and, voting for everything the Bible's against and hating God. But then he turns around and he's like, but hey, I'm not judging. Yeah, you are.
Yeah, that's exactly what you're doing.
Yeah, and the thing is, and this is how he does it, and you can look, he's kind of taken a page from Republican, Trump politics, and that is, when he starts talking about something, he'll get on a roll, and then all of a sudden he'll throw something in there. If you remember, he was talking about, immigrants, and all of a sudden he starts hammering, and OSHA said they're not going to force companies, they're not going to force companies to take the vaccination. So it's like, hey, we're going to give you some stuff, and we'll throw in a win that we always kind of believed in, so I'm right. That has nothing to do with what we're talking about, and then we're going to go back into our real conversation. And sadly, for his followers, I think most of them are kind of fooled by that.
Right. They absorb it because it's something that they want to hear, right?
Yeah, and if you look at their website, they always encourage frequent visitation. They ask for, and I quote, if you're a new member, come 3 times. Well, you come 3 times so you can hear that indoctrination over and over and over again. Really, and I get that, but I don't know how you grew up, but in my beliefs and within my flock, I don't think God takes attendance.
Right, like a roll call, making sure that everybody's in church on Sunday. You got to be here to worship.
Yeah, when I've said it, in the past when I've stood in front of the pulpit, I see familiar faces and I see new faces, and sometimes, familiar ones aren't there. I'm not going to call them up and say, hey, you didn't come to church, I'll come.
Right.
God doesn't take attendance. I can be just as spiritual and pray in my house as I can my church or my synagogue or, my mosque. It doesn't matter.
And I feel like I remember hearing something about that specifically in the Bible. Your home, your house of residence, where you are, in worship.
Yeah, it's in the New Testament,
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of it's in, Paul's letters to the Corinthians and the Acts, and it discusses, how to be a good Christian, if you will. And it says flatly, anywhere people gather, you can pray. If that's virtually online, it's a fine, you're fine with it.
Right, and that place to be itself a holy place, right?
Yeah, exactly. The internet can be a holy place, and I'm fairly certain all of us have found things of wonder and awe as we surf the web.
Yeah, it's inevitable. Honestly, it's inescapable. You find something that will surprise you and definitely will be in awe of. It's a pretty crazy place.
Even sitting in your house and praying with your family, you can be just as spiritual and just as religious as if you're, sitting with 10,000 other people spreading a possibly deadly disease.
Yeah.
Virus.
Absolutely, with no worry in the world.
Right, there's no worry in the world, right? There's an old proverb, it's an old Hebrew proverb, and it says something to the effect of, God will provide, but if only he'll provide while we're waiting.
Right.
Right? And that's the thing, you have to be patient. And Smotherman and pastors of his ilk aren't. They want things right now. And God doesn't work that way.
Yeah, you can almost consider them accelerationists, in a way.
Exactly. Well, that's exactly what they are. And they're accelerationists in that. I hate to say it, but Smotherman's an accelerationist. I'll just say it flat out.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. It is definitely.
And the thing is, as he's doing it, he does it in such a manner so that he's denigrating immigrants, he's denigrating Democrats, he's insulting people left and right. And when he does that, it's dangerous because his followers are going to buy into it.
Well, and I feel like it all happens.
Ended up with the El Paso gunman or the Gabby Gifford. The senator from Arizona, that's how she ended up being shot,
Right.
Rhetoric like that is hateful and harmful.
And I feel like it all happens so fast. He's just, he's just speedballing, like all these are, speedballing all these things and just fitting it all in there that sometimes these people aren't actually, they don't catch all of it, but they're still absorbing it because he's saying it in every single sermon,
It kind of reminds me of an old Saturday Night Live sketch, Subliminal Message Man, I think is what it was. And I think it was a Norm Macdonald thing, I don't remember, but, it was a skit that they were doing. It was all about subliminal messages and advertising, and really, that's what he does. Like I said, we're talking about his style of speech and, how he'll throw something in that makes no sense in context. But he throws it in there, and it throws people off. And oh, wait, and they forgot about what he already just said because they're still worried about what he just, they're worried about what he just said because they heard the new stuff, and I don't get it. And we've got to make sense of it on our own. But, Smotherman's there to help you make sense out of it in his vision.
Yeah, in his own wild worldview of whatever it is he is talking about. It's insane.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I wouldn't go so far as to call Pastor Smotherman a white nationalist, but he's definitely a nationalist.
Oh, definitely nationalist. Absolutely. Yeah, that is definitely a good generalization. Yeah, because definitely can't refer to him specifically as a white nationalist because he doesn't, overtly say that. But who really does? They of course they slip it in there in their own ways, but it's like his anti-immigrant
Well,
stuff and
and he does
accusing
that because
immigrants and stuff.
and he does do that in sort of a way, like he discusses the southern border quite a bit in that particular, sermon, discussing about how, it's these immigrants that are coming up and nobody's checking on them to make sure if they're okay, and they're not taking any tests, and they're not doing this, they're not doing that, the other. And really, if we look at the government documents, that's exactly opposite of what they're doing.
Right. And I mean, what does he have to worry about that anyway if he's so against even being tested or getting vaccinated or himself? How is he going to say
and that's the thing I question too. I mean, admittedly, I am a pastor. I'm interdenominational reverend, which means I know quite a bit about a lot of the living world religions that are around today. And I honestly think that God supports vaccines.
Right.
If we take that adage and a true literal interpretation of the Bible, that, we have to think that God gave us these scientists and created the knowledge within them to create this vaccine, right? So it is an ordained vaccine that we should be taking, but here they are. Oh, no, I don't trust it. Well, are you going to take a literal interpretation of the Bible or not? Because if you are, then this is what you need to do.
Right, and wasn't it Donald Trump's idea of Operation Warp Speed to push through a vaccine as fast as he could, and yet they're so against it?
Yeah, that's the best part. I'm like, we got rid of him, we voted him out because of his personality, but we like his policies.
We love his policies.
You're still telling your parishioners not to get vaccinated.
Right. Oh my God, these people are definitely something else. So here's the.
Even then, I look at his rant on immigrants as well, and Smotherman forgets his roots. He forgets the roots of Christianity and Judaism as a whole. The whole monotheistic idea. So Judaism was the first monotheistic religion that we had, and Christianity is obviously an offshoot from that, right? And so we look at Deuteronomy, and even Deuteronomy 10-19 in the AMP version of the Bible says, show your love for the stranger, for you were a stranger in the land of Egypt. He seems to forget those roots.
Right, because it doesn't fit within his idea of what should be, and what shouldn't be, I guess.
Well, it seems to me like Pastor Smotherman is trying to preach the idea that God is an American, and that's all he really cares about.
Right. Though he definitely was an American, definitely wasn't, white. He's this Middle Eastern man.
I'm fairly certain he probably, we're going beyond. We're talking about God, not, the Son of God, obviously. But, I'm fairly certain that he probably has blonde hair, blue-eyed Jesus hanging in his home, despite the fact that we all know he was probably, olive-skinned, if not darker.
Yeah, definitely. So,
and I tend to go with the idea that Jesus was probably darker.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So moving on to the next step. Let me make sure this is actually in order.
Them from the power, or rescues them from the power of the wicked. What does he call the sinner?
Oh yeah.
People who don't believe in him? Wicked. That sets a standard. If you love the Lord, there are things you must hate. Anything that is in opposition to that is in opposition to the love of God. We have to hate. In other words, anything that's against the will of God or the word of God, we're supposed to hate. We're supposed to hate sin. And the reason some of us keep petting sin is because we don't really hate it. And we have to learn to hate it. And so love defines the attitude. And we need to understand that we're in opposition to those things, and we are if we love and we love God, and we know God is love, but he also hates. We separate the sin from the sinner. God never does. When we do, it will be harder to reach people. Psalms 119:104. Your commandments give me understanding. No wonder I hate every false way. Psalms 119, 113. I hate those with divided loyalties, but I love your instruction. Some say, what about New Testament? James 1, verses 6 through 8. They're going to put it on the screen. I'm going to read it from there. But when you ask him, be sure that your faith is in God alone. Do not waver, for a person with divided loyalty is as unsettled as a wave of the sea that is blown and tossed by the wind. Such people should not expect to receive anything from the Lord. Their loyalty is divided between God and the world, and they are unstable in everything they do.
Now, what was he getting at there?
So, it's actually, I think in all honesty, it's sort of a misunderstanding. He talks about the book of John and then his discussions there about, wavering between sinning and not. And really, he's taking a translation that I don't quite understand where that comes from. I've been through both the American Standard Version and the AMP version of it. And looking at it, it's a conversation that Paul's having that John's having with an individual. And, with himself, if you will. And really, he's sort of saying, well, we have the concept of sin. And we do, right? There are 623 commandments in the Old Testament. Now, we're going to say Christianity follows both the Old and the New Testament, but, they base it primarily on the New Testament. So if there's 623 commandments in the Old Testament, then everybody in here is capable and commits sin. I mean, just watching him give that sermon in his, denim jeans and cotton poly blend is a sin. You can't mix your fabrics. So, does that mean that he's doomed to hell because he mixes fabrics up? And that's the thing is that, God hates the sinner, yes, or hates the sin rather, but I don't think God hates anybody.
Right.
The concept is that, we hate the sin, and I get that. Like we're all sinners at heart, and we know that. So would that mean automatically that because maybe you have an impure thought, you're no longer allowed in heaven?
Right.
I think it's a mistranslation in there, and it's not necessarily it's a misunderstanding, basically. The Bible's up for interpretation, but his interpretation is a little way out there.
Is completely way out there, and it's organized, I guess, to be that way, though, right? I mean, because I'm sure he's an intelligent person, and he knows what he's doing, and it's all meant, designed by design.
Right, exactly. And he only picks specific passages, and he does it intentionally, and he ignores other gospels. But a lot of Christianity does this. Like, they ignore the gospel according to Judas and the gospel according to Mary Magdalene because they didn't want to put that stuff in there. Because I think what would happen is they would sort of, if they would have put that, those gospels in there, it would sort of dampen or darken the image of Jesus. I mean, I get where we're going with that concept. But, even in the Bible, we understand that Jesus wasn't perfect. He lost his temper. He got angry. Jesus, not once but twice, broke rules on the Sabbath. Or, he walked into, the temple and flipped out and started destroying the tables of the money changers and whatnot.
Right.
So, if we throw all that stuff in there, then obviously Jesus takes a little bit of a dim look. You know what I'm saying? It sort of diminishes that perfect view. So, and that's what he's doing, is he's ignoring those parts where, we're fallible and we have issues. He ignores those parts. And instead turns that into an accusation.
Right.
And that's where it lies in there. Like, he's really good with his language. Look at how he does that. He talks about John and Mark and this and that and the other, and he pulls it all in really, really fast. So that you really don't have time to flip back and forth in your Bible to see what John really said.
Right, and it's not like anybody who attends these sermons goes back and listens to the whole thing to really get to understand everything that he was saying.
Yeah, that's the thing. Yeah, you see, that's the thing about blind faith, and Smotherman relies a lot on the concept of blind faith, and that nobody's going to question what he has to say within his law.
So, moving on to the next segment.
Give to God. See, God wants us to put Him first in every area of our lives. And the tithe is how we do that financially. And here's what we know, that if you put God first financially, you are so much more likely to put God first in every other area of your life as well. And God will bless you for it. That is so true. And I actually have a scripture to share with everyone that goes right along with this. You wouldn't think so right off the top, but it's John 10:18, and it says, this is Jesus speaking, "No one takes it from me, but I lay it down on my own accord." I have authority to lay it down, and I have authority to take it up again. He's been given that authority from his Father, he says, who is God. Now, we have that same authority to give. We have that same, nobody can take that from us. Nobody can say, you have to do this. This is of your own accord. I believe Jesus set that example for us to say it's powerful when you decide on your own to obey God.
That's right. And when you do, you really are changing the world, just like Ty said. And like we mentioned in the pregame show, 164 people decided to take a next step with Jesus, to get involved, to start living generously and making a difference. And your giving helps make that possible. You are changing people's lives. So thank you for your generosity and faithfulness. Ty, would you like to pray?
Let's go ahead and pray. Father, we come to you right now.
Yeah.
We thank you
Yeah,
so
you
much for everyone that's
You can,
online.
yeah.
What was that? Sorry.
Yeah, so here's the thing, like, yeah, you know, I mean, they're writing the book of John there, but John wasn't talking about money. You know, Jesus wasn't talking about money either. He was talking about your personal life. Like, you know, dedicate yourself, not your pocketbook.
Right, because I highly doubt Jesus was a capitalist.
No, I don't think Jesus was a capitalist at all. Jesus was a socialist, if anything. If we had to put, you know, a modern label on it, you know, yeah, you know, Jesus is a socialist, and the whole concept of, like, you know, if you give a man a fish, he eats for a day, but if you teach him to fish, he eats for a lifetime. That's true. What do you think education's all about, right? But what they've done is they've sort of perverted this passage, and instead of talking about yourself as a person, they're talking about your pocketbook, right? It's called the Gospels of Prosperity. The more you give to God in your tithing, the better you'll be. You know, it's reminiscent of, like, this is the same stuff that Martin Luther got pissed off about, right? You're buying indulgences in essence, right? So, you know, that's the way I look at it. Martin Luther would be pissed, and that's the way it is. You know, give us your money so we can help more people. Okay, you know, it's like, well, we know you killed somebody, but if you build a new wing to the church, we'll forgive you.
Right.
You know, that's sort of the meaning that I take away from that whole commercial about wanting to tithe. You know, tithing is important, don't get me wrong, but I don't think tithing in this case was necessarily in terms of your financial impact.
No, and how often does, especially Legacy Church, how often do they help anybody at all if it isn't, you know, in a direct personal way by somebody, you know, who is a former addict or something and going to their sermon and actually coming out, you know, feeling better.
Well,
otherwise, they don't really ever help anybody.
Their outreach isn't really outreach, it's more like in-reach.
Right.
You know, I'm sure that they have people that go out and feed the homeless, and I'm sure they have people that, you know, run around and do that. But, you know, they also pass a lot of judgment on people.
Oh, yeah.
You know, I mean, I don't know if you've ever passed the women's clinic on San Mateo, but you see, you know, members of Legacy and various churches all around there. And, you know, really, why are you judging people? You know, and again, they're relying on that concept of, like, you know, God hates sinners, and that's not true.
No, not one bit. Not one bit. I mean, if anything, he was, you know, sleeping and feeding the sinners. He was helping the sinners, you know, because of what they were, the way they lived and how they lived, and he died for them.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Jesus, there's a passage, Jesus, you know, walks into a prison and washes the feet of the prisoners. You know, and every year, well, not every year, but periodically, the new pope does the same thing. It has nothing to do with money. It has more to do with outreach, you know, and I don't think that their outreach, I think they spend more money on their productions than they do their outreach.
Right.
Now, I haven't seen their financials, and being a 503C or 501c3, a nonprofit, all you have to do is file an IPRA request.
Yep.
And then they should be able to give them to you. But I'm not entirely certain if they have religious exemptions in there.
Right, and I mean the way they seem to be living, you know, they gotta be pretty well off.
That's the thing, right?
And Jesus was
and that's the question.
He wasn't out there paying people's bills or anything like that, you know.
No. He was out there teaching people how to do it on their own.
Yeah.
You know, and that's the beauty of it. It was like, this is how we take care of ourselves. We love one another. And it was, you know, one of those things like, it says, you know, love one another right there. It's in the Bible, you know. I mean, we can pull it up the direct, you know, reference if you want. But, you know, when we look at that concept of peace and love, I don't think that Smotherman's preaching that at all.
Mm-mm.
If anything, he's preaching hatred of the other.
Absolutely.
I look at how he words things, like God says this, so other people that don't follow, it's right there, the other. Right, but you know, we follow those rules to a T, you know, and that's the other issue. And you touched on this briefly about the concept of a megachurch.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you end up with megachurches that require tithing or beg for tithing, as the case may be in the gospel of prosperity. Well, that's how you end up with, you know, the Joel Osteens of the world living in multi-million-dollar homes and driving, you know, $200,000 cars.
Right.
Or Pat Robertson begging for his private airplane because God said. I don't think God ever actually said to anybody, get your own private airplane.
Right, and he's definitely not, you know, in a prison washing anybody's feet.
Yeah, no, no, I don't know. Actually, I'd have to look into it and make some phone calls, but I couldn't tell you if Pastor Smotherman's involved in any of the jail outreach programs.
Yeah, I definitely doubt it. Definitely doubt it.
No. I can tell you I've never seen a legacy church bus parked downtown when they drop them off, when they're released from the Metro Detention Center.
No, none of their victory outreach down there.
No, you don't see any of that down there. I mean, you see smaller churches out there.
Oh, yeah.
But I've never seen that one.
So continue this clip. Let's hear this prayer that these two added to the end of this right here. Let's see.
Right now, everyone who is contributing and changing the world and being obedient with their tithes and offerings, I pray that you would move on their hearts to do so. And I pray that you would bless these tithes and offerings, that they would go and reach souls for you, Father God, that more people would be able to. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. Let me say one more thing as well.
Give us money so we can talk to more people.
Yeah.
We encourage you to tithe here. If you have another church home somewhere else, we encourage you to give your tithe there.
Yes.
But you could always partner with us in offerings and things like that, and you will make a difference. Another way to give to tithe that we are passionate about at Legacy is by giving blood.
Absolutely.
Donating blood. We have a blood drive coming up November 21st at our.
I heard that and I was immediately like, no thanks. I don't think I want to do that.
Yeah. I mean, I probably believe in the gift of donating blood, and I donate as often as I can.
Man, it's going to
But,
be a great night,
I want to
guys.
give it to them.
So please get ready right now. Pastor Steve is going to be an amazing
Okay. Moving on to the next one.
message. Please enjoy service.
Doctrine of compromise, that somehow we are to put up with the sin. And so in this church, we have problems all the time with people coming in that are homosexuals or lesbians, and they want to have public displays of affection, and we go to them and say,
Yeah,
you're
this
more
part's,
than welcome to come, but you are not welcome to have public displays of affection. But they believe it's okay and normal because the church has taken...
You want to speak on that?
Yeah, I do. First of all, I don't believe that God hates gays or lesbians at all. You know, for all, that's sort of contrary to that lesson that he teaches about, you know, everybody being born in the eyes of God, you know, within that little concept there. You know, it flies in the face of that to begin with. There are a lot of mistranslations in the current Bible. If you were to read the Holy Scripture from the original Aramaic and you compare it to what we have today, there are a lot of mistranslations. For example, in the book of Exodus, we're taught that Moses led the Israelites across, you know, through the Red Sea, part of the Red Sea. In actuality, the word is reed, R-E-E-D, and we have to consider, you know, the earth at that particular point in time. The Sinai Peninsula was basically a swamp 5,000 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So, if you're leading a whole bunch of people on foot through a swamp and you're being chased by Romans on chariots, who's going to get further faster? People on feet or Romans on chariots? Or Egyptians on chariots, rather.
Right.
People on feet are going to be able to move more fast, are going to be able to move faster because those wheels are going to get stuck in the mud.
Absolutely.
By the same token, when we look at the concept of homosexuality in the Bible, it doesn't really say no. What they're doing is they're relying on a mistranslation. It says a man should not lie with another man. But if we look at the letters that they used, and capitals and how they put it, they're saying, a man should not lie with a male child. God hates pedophiles, not gays and lesbians.
Right.
And really, that's all I got to say on that.
Right on. I'm definitely glad that you spoke on that. Absolutely.
It's a mistranslation that's been used to oppress people for years. And Smotherman uses the same thing, the same method to oppress immigrants.
And there was actually an argument that I had seen online recently on Facebook. Somebody I used to be friends with on Facebook, and there was this. He was pointing out that there was this another version of the Bible written by people, queer people, homosexuals. There was another Bible that was written that they used. I can't remember exactly what it was called, and I couldn't help but be aggravated at what he was saying and how this was evil. And I was like, well, these people worship the same God as you do, so you're saying that they are wrong for it?
Right.
This is their interpretation of it, but it's, in essence, it's the same thing that you are supposed to be believing in. And I can't for the life of me remember what it was called, but I was like, there shouldn't be something wrong with it.
I'll definitely look that up. But it seems like your friend was criticizing the fact that the gay and lesbian community had created their own version. That's kind of what everybody does.
Yeah. Absolutely.
You've got, as I go through my references, I've got about 15 different versions of the Holy Bible in my home office.
Right. Absolutely. It's been rewritten. I don't even know how many times.
Version, the American Standard Version. Yeah. And every time we rewrite it, they kind of, things get shifted around a little bit.
Right. It's like a game of telephone almost.
Yeah, well, it's kind of a false equivalency here, but we can sort of approach the Bible the same way we do the Constitution. It's a living, breathing document.
Mm-hmm.
It changes, and meaning should change as we grow as a society.
Right, and it to fit the times and how people change and adapt and interpret things. It's always going to change.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We can look at any amendment in the Constitution, and we can equate it to pretty much any passage in the Bible. They change over time.
Right. It's
as society changes and our values change, and even Christian values have changed as well. I'd like to ask Pastor Smotherman if he exiles his wife and daughters from the house every month during their menstrual cycle.
Oh, right.
Because that's in the Bible, in the Old Testament, we're commanded to do that we must remove those that are impure from our house. Well, if your wife is on her menstrual cycle, she's now impure according to the Bible, so she can't stay there.
Right.
Now, I do know some very, very Orthodox Jews that do live that sort of lifestyle, and they do follow as closely as they possibly can. And his wife leaves the house every month on her menstrual cycle and hangs out in a tent out in the backyard. Now, when she's done, she has to bathe in a mikveh, which is a big religious bath in Jewish heritage, and then she's allowed back into the house.
Wow, that is
Right.
That's intense. I've never heard of that myself.
Yeah, it is intense, and that's the point. Is that Pastor Smotherman, anybody really, but particularly Pastor Smotherman, you pick and choose which you want to follow.
Right.
I love a good shrimp cocktail, but it's not kosher.
Right.
Who doesn't like cracking open the tail end of a lobster every once in a while?
Right, yeah, I do. I haven't had one myself in a long time. Not exactly cozy.
You know, I mean, exactly, right? So, I mean, what are you going to do?
Right.
You can pick and choose, you're going to follow them all on your own. And Smotherman picks and chooses what he wants to follow, and ignores the rest.
Right. So getting back to the clip here.
Yeah, going back to it.
We say, but Pastor, they're people. I know they're people. But God says we are to hate sin. They're sinners, and God will judge them if they don't judge themselves. But why are we to condone it? Well, if you want to reach them, you'll condone it. No, if we allow it, then we'll never reach them. Because they're already okay. It'd just be like an alcoholic coming in here just throwing some down. I'd be like, you can't do that here. You want to drink, you go outside, but you're not going to drink in here. But don't you love me? Yeah, we love you enough to tell you you're not drinking in here. Why is that okay? And everybody say, well, that makes sense. But the other one's not. Because we have bought into this philosophy the church world has: love the sinner and hate the sin. And God never separates.
Or you just ignore the book of Matthew.
Because I was once a sinner.
You want to speak on that?
But even when he says love,
No, I mean, it's his whole thing. He's like, hate the sinner and the sin all at the same time. And he talks about, the concept like an alcoholic. I've dealt with alcoholics. We all have. Do I hate the alcoholism? Yes. Does that mean I don't love my neighbor? No, that's not what it means. It means I want to help my neighbor get over that alcohol issue, right? But again, we've got to talk about the changing of things. And, when Smotherman was a kid, and he was probably coming up through whatever fundamentalist church he claims to be from, the idea of homosexuality was a choice. But we now know it's not. We're born one way or the other. That's just the way it is.
Right.
So why are you turning your back on God's creation?
Right. If this is according to, his beliefs, that's God's will, right?
Yeah, right, exactly. And then if we want to go further with that, then why do you keep judging and refusing when Matthew 7:1 tells us exactly, judge not lest you be judged. His own version of the Bible says that. Do not judge and criticize and condemn others unfairly with an attitude of self-righteous superiority. Is that not what he's doing?
Absolutely. It sounds like it to me.
But, yeah. I didn't mean to interrupt there. I'm sorry.
That's okay. That's fine.
I hear that. It's fine.
That's fine. I love it. Just contradicting his bullshit. It's great to me.
Loving each other like a parent or a good friend. That's not what he's talking about. And we think that's what it means. So if we love God, there are things we're supposed to hate. If we love them, then we will, if we just love them and we love the sinner and hate the sin.
Oh, crap.
Them from the power.
Oh, dang it. I messed up.
See, there you go. If we hate the sin, we hate the person. He doesn't separate the two. God does.
So if we love God, there are things we're supposed to hate.
Okay, yeah.
If we love them, then we will, if we just love them and we love the sinner and hate the sin, we will tolerate what they do. We will even allow it in our homes. I don't know how many parents and families I've had that they allow their kids to live in sin in their home because what are we supposed to do? We're supposed to love them. And I'm like, yeah, you love them by saying, you can't do that in my home. There's a standard here. Yeah, but Pastor, they have nowhere to live. That's on them. Why do...
So there's I have one more clip in here that
Yeah, that's the whole separation. He makes the claim that God doesn't separate. But I disagree, because if God never separated the sinner from the sin, then we lose the concept of, redemption.
Right. Because
right? You can redeem yourself.
That's what you're supposed to be able to, according to the script, according to the texture, to the belief in the faith. You're supposed to be able to redeem yourself. You're supposed to be granted that opportunity.
That's the point, right?
Yeah.
Well, and that's the thing, is that with most religion, and particularly Christianity, the concept in modern Christianity is to provide hope, right? Even in the old, fire and brimstone of the early part of our country's history, there was some hope in there. But now, with that concept that Smotherman's preaching, like, oh, living in sin under my house because I have no place to live. So, this happens time to time. We're living in a post-pandemic world where, let's face it, nobody can afford to live off minimum wage.
Right.
So what?
Well, of course, yeah.
And then if you
know
go
something like
further,
that.
because you allowed your child to live with their, boyfriend, girlfriend, or whatever, outside the sanctity of marriage, does that mean that you too are going to hell and condemned? Again, that flies in the whole basic concept of sin and redemption. There's always been that glimmer of hope. Like, if you take the Bible for all it is, every book starting with Genesis and ending in Revelations, they always preach that concept of sin and redemption. Yeah, we screw up, but we can make ourselves better again. Like, isn't that how we sort of based our entire prison system?
Yeah, it's supposed to be rehabilitation.
We know in actuality it doesn't work that way.
Mm-mm.
We know in actuality it doesn't work that way, and our prison systems are warehousing more than redeeming. But if you look at the Bible, like I said, anything from Genesis to Revelation, the concept is redemption. And Smotherman's whole claim there about God hates the sinner and the sin, it's so polar opposite from what's really there.
Right. So, moving on to the next part that I want to highlight is from a website called Liberty Pastors that Steve Smotherman is a member of. And these things are pretty freaking crazy. It's all like QAnon just written all over it. So I'm going to go ahead and read these.
Yeah, well, that's what QAnon is.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong. We're talking about a group of people that hung out on the grassy knoll waiting for the return of JFK and his dad, or JFK and JFK Jr.
Which is completely ridiculous. Didn't he die in, what was it, 99, something like that?
Something like that, yeah. JFK Jr. died in a plane crash in 99, somewhere in there, late 90s, early 2000s, and everybody, that has a television has probably seen the Zapruder films of, his father, John F. Kennedy, being assassinated on the grassy knoll, probably not.
Right. So in the screenshot, it says, beginning with Enoch, God has called out his chosen men to stand strong and proclaim truth in a sinful world. As pastors, we are not called to be church builders, acting as CEOs, competing with the church down the block. We are called to proclaim the truth of salvation in Jesus Christ alone to a lost world and to equip the saints for the work of the ministry. As light, we are to equip our people and lead them out to confront the culture and point people to Jesus Christ. As salt, we are to equip...
Yeah, doesn't that run counter to the clip we just heard?
Yeah.
Like, the clip we just heard was that, God hates sinners and sin. Sin and sinners. And in this one, he's like, okay, we got to offer redemption. How can you redeem something you don't like?
Right. It's
you reject it.
Completely backwards.
Right.
So, as salt, we are to equip our people and lead them to reprove the unfruitful works of darkness. America was founded on this truth. So the next paragraph starts as...
America was not founded on that truth. I mean, it's very clear that our founding fathers did not intend for this to be a Judeo-Christian country. That's why we have that separation of church and state. We look at that Bill of Rights as like all the things that we can do. And it's not really that. It's a list of things the government can't do.
Right.
The government cannot establish a state religion. Okay, you can worship however you so choose, whether you want to or not. But then we turn around and we have people like Smotherman and Michael Flynn that are trying to preach only one God, one religion.
Right. And only the religion as they see fit.
Exactly.
They twist it, to their own wicked beliefs anyway.
Exactly.
So the Great Revival that history calls the Great Awakening was the event that unified America to become one nation under God. The message that ye must be born again resonated, and the colonists realized that it was not church membership but a personal relationship with Jesus Christ that made you a Christian. Now that's screams QAnon to me.
Yeah, it is in a way. I mean, the concept of the idea that that God is the person, that's the Christian, not the whole thing. That's pretty common. We see that throughout Christianity. But when we look at the concept of the Great Awakening, the Great Awakening, it wasn't invented that unified America to becoming one nation under God, and that's definitely not there. The Great Awakening that he's referring to happened in the 17, 1800s. And you'll note that we didn't limit people down to one religion. It was one of those things where, it was a spiritual awakening for a lot of Christians in this country.
Mm-hmm.
But there wasn't any talk on destroying, the Jewish temples or, the Sikh temples or anything like that.
Yeah, no.
It was sort of like within ourselves. They take an extreme view of it.
Right.
So, Liberty Pastors, some of their stuff comes from Scripture, but it's a bastardized interpretation.
Right, to just to fit the message that they want to push,
Yeah.
So the Great Awakening.
To be fair, that's how it works.
Yeah, because it's all for them an indoctrinating message anyway, because everybody always has an agenda,
Yeah. Yeah, in my practice and in my parish, my agenda is to preach and teach all. I don't care whether you're black, white, Hispanic, gay, straight, bisexual, swingers. It doesn't bother me either way.
Right.
I'm just as comfortable praying with a gay couple than I am a straight couple. It doesn't matter. But other churches feel the different way, and that's the whole concept of indoctrination.
Right.
I choose to teach, preach peace and love and acceptance, and Smotherman chooses to preach peace and love and acceptance as long as you follow my opinion.
Right, because we're all different in our own ways. Whether we were born this way or it might be a choice, but we're all here for the same reason. So why can't we do that together? Yeah, and you can kind of
see that starting to evolve in that Liberty Pastors group right there in those two paragraphs. You can see them evolve that in there. Mm-hmm. But it's not hard written. It's sort of this nebulous idea. Smotherman, I think even Smotherman would be on the far right side of that group as well.
Right. Well,
I don't want to call Steve Smotherman a Christo-fascist. I don't think that he is, but I think he's coming really close to it.
Absolutely. So, next paragraph reads, the Great Awakening transitioned into the continuing work of the Patriot Pastors. The King of England willfully placed himself above the law as he unilaterally broke the charters that were in place between the colonies and Great Britain. As the colonists sought to print Bibles and tracts for the Indians, the king said no. As Pennsylvania voted to outlaw slavery, the king said no. The king rejected the authority of elected offices in America and placed his own handpicked governors over the colonists. Finally, the rumor of a plan to establish the Church of England over the colonies and outlaw other religious denominations was one of the last straws. The king placed troops in America even though there was no conflict with the Indians or France. The effort was clearly to subjugate the colonists. Now that to me sounds like they're trying to say that they hadn't done any wrong and that they were actually being the victims, when of course they were trying to fight for their own liberties as colonists against England or whatever. But this is a completely revisionist history.
It's revisionist history at its best. And it harkens back to that idea of like Romans 1 or Romans 13, right, where we're supposed to honor the government above us because God ordained that to be there, the civil government. So, if we look at that concept, King George did place troops here and, he did do all of that, but, it was to enforce a concept of taxes. In American history, particularly if we look at the Revolutionary War, only about a third of the population really wanted to separate.
Right.
And they just happened to be the ones that owed the most in taxes.
Right, and
You
it
know,
was
if
the
you
taxation
were,
of their slave trade, right?
yeah, well, well, that's part of it. But I mean, if we eliminate the concept of the slave trade, because that continues in America throughout the 1700s,
Oh yeah.
and I say that we're going to have to eliminate it because it does continue, right? The majority of Americans at the time, they didn't care whether they were British citizens or whether they broke off and started a new colony or a new country. They didn't care. They just wanted to eat.
Right, and either way, they were paying up to somebody.
Right. They're going to have to pay somebody either way, but they really just wanted to eat. So really, we look at the Boston Tea Party and the flower riots and whatnot that came through. There was a bunch of rich people that didn't want to pay taxes anymore.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, and
And
that's
the
indicative
thing,
of today also.
Yeah, and that goes against that teaching of the Bible of give unto Caesar's what is Caesar's and give unto God what is God's. In concept of taxing and tithing, it's basically the same thing.
Right.
In theory, your money, your tithing goes to the church's outreach and whatnot, and in theory, your taxes go to pay for government programs like roads and streets and education.
Right. The infrastructure that they don't care about really, honestly.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's the whole concept of this, gospel of prosperity. When you get into it, really, they're only preaching the gospel of prosperity. The more you do and the more you give to the church, the better off you're going to be.
Right.
When you've got a whole lot of other things to worry about. But yeah, they're taking that whole. It's a very whitewashed version of American history, right?
Absolutely.
And so overly simplified, it's not even funny.
No, definitely not. And yeah, I find myself laughing. So next paragraph reads, as the king tightened his grip, stripping liberty from the colonists themselves were uniting as a result of the Great Awakening. Rather than 13 very divided entities, they became one nation under God. It was the patriot pastors that were the backbone, the black regiment, as the British called those men that ascended to their pulpits in their black clerical robes and stirred the people's hearts to liberty from tyranny. We'll have no king but Jesus, was the cry after a long train of usurpation of the law had continued and requests for relief gone unanswered. The colonies finally were forced to declare their independence. That is so relative to what is exactly they're crying about today. I mean, they're saying that they're being stripped of their freedoms, and even places like Texas are talking about seceding. I mean, this is exactly what I hear them crying about today.
Well, let's be fair. Texas has discussed the concept of secession every couple of years since they were founded, since they fell into the country.
That is true.
Since they became a part of the United States. I mean, Texas is is the only state that can say it was for a brief period of time its own country.
Yeah, that is true too. Until
the
Alamo.
I think it harkens back to that concept, but the idea of secession is just so far beyond what could really happen.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it does harken to what they're preaching today, and they're doing that a lot. Smotherman's whole sermon on I hate the sinner and the sin. It fits right into that concept, and quite frankly, I'm kind of offended by the concept of black preachers or whatever they'll call it because we wear black robes. I wear a black robe because it's what I like to wear and it's tradition.
Right.
It's not because I'm some great patriot preacher. I mean, I do believe I'm a patriot. I paid for my undergraduate degree with my service in the United States military. So it's not like I just sat here, and was some spoiled kid that sat around and apostatized about what the world would be like. I've done my time in this world. I've taught for, in poor communities across the state and across the city with children that, nobody ever cared about.
Right.
So, and that's the thing, is he's basically saying, well, it's this very select group of preachers. And yeah, but they were kind of off their rocker at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is the same one. And we're talking about the same preacher, like Jonathan Witherspoon, the great reverend, and I can't remember the name of his church, but one of the most famous sermons are, Sins in the Hands of an Angry God, where he compared man to a spider dangling on a web off of God's finger. And with, but a flick of his finger, you could be thrown into the fiery pits of hell.
Oh, I think that was a question I was just about to ask too. That's a...
Yeah. but that takes off a very negative role of a negative concept of the Bible, and it ignores that concept of redemption.
Right, coming back to again to Smotherman's sermon at the end there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Smotherman ignores the concept of redemption, whereas Jonathan Witherspoon did not.
Right.
He's like, you have to repent, you have to redeem, otherwise. And Smotherman's like, nah, you're just going to go if you're a sinner.
It's so backwards. It's astounding.
Yeah, exactly. That's what happens with Smotherman. That's the problem with Smotherman, is he fails to separate the sin from the person.
So the last two little parts here. Oh, sorry. Continue.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
So not only
was
was
go off on a tangent about like government thought.
Oh, I love it.
We don't want to do that.
I love it though. It's all good. So not only was it
goes down to the concept of like how we think of man, right? Like we can think of man as good, and this is the way I believe. Personally, I think man is born good, and through circumstance or through lesson, man is taught to do bad things, right? But in Smotherman's view, God is born evil, or man is born evil. I'm sorry.
Right.
And it's through God, and through his belief, and through his unwavering devotion to the Bible, to this, amplified version of the Bible, that, he's allowed into heaven. And then he becomes redeemed, or whatever you want to call it. But I don't think that's the way it works.
Right. It definitely isn't. And subscribing to this hate that God, according to him, has, like, it just doesn't work like that.
I don't know if you have children or not, but I do.
Mm-hmm.
And I was there at the birth of both of my children. I remember looking down in those beautiful eyes of both of my children. And the first thought that came to me was like, oh my God, this is an evil little kid. That is not the thought I had, but apparently that's what Smotherman sees. I don't know.
Definitely not what I felt either. The first time my son opened his eyes and looked up at me that first time, definitely not, oh, this kid is, a little evil baby. That is not what I felt.
I never had that thought. Now I've seen some kids later on that have done some things. I'm like, well,
certainly questionable.
But again, I do believe in the concept of redemption.
Absolutely.
So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to go off on my little rant about thoughts of man and government.
No, that's fine. That's fine. We need it. So not only was it the influence of the pulpit, of course. Not only was it the influence of the pulpit that led to the birth of this great nation, but it has been the pulpit that has led in the fight against every social ill in America, whether that be slavery, discrimination, suffrage, liquor, abortion, etc. America is in desperate need of another great awakening. America is in desperate need of another generation of men like Enoch, Elijah, Nathan, Isaiah, Jeremiah, John Witherspoon, George Whitefield, James Caldwell, Jonathan Mayhew, Samuel Cooper, Jonas Clark, and John Peter Gabriel Muhlenberg. America needs you.
See, I heard you click on that Witherspoon, and I was reading along with you. See, I knew he would cite it. Smotherman is just an old fire and brimstone preacher that doesn't have anything else to go off of.
Right.
He kind of, to be fair, it kind of reminds me of, like, we all have that one drunk relative that says some really stupid shit.
Oh my God.
That he reminds me of that drunk relative. Like, I have an uncle that way. Every time we get together, he just says some stupid shit, and I'm like, well, what are you going to do? The times have changed. We have scientific we have scientific, achievements, and we understand how brains work to some extent. It's ridiculous.
Right. Well, what are you going to do? Sit there and, argue with them and tell them why? You can cite this, that, and the other, and it just won't even matter.
And that's the thing with Smotherman is you can sit and debate with him and say, well, okay, well, you're, hammering the government and saying we shouldn't follow it, but Roman says we should. And he'll give you some weird perverted reason on why we shouldn't, from like, Corinthians or John, where it talks about legit corrupt governments that were stealing money while people starved.
Right. And of course, they wouldn't, point that out, even though that's, still kind of sort of happening today. But as long as Smotherman's pockets are full, what does he have to care about? He
Yeah.
just steals money from his own congregation.
Well, and that's the thing. I mean, like I said, I found a source where it claims that, Smotherman Ministry is only worth about $46,000. But I can't find out how much he's worth as an individual.
Right.
And I don't know if we can.
Probably not.
I mean, like, Joel Osteen we know because we know where he lives, we know what he drives. I don't know anything about Smotherman.
No, he probably has some sort of religious exemption from any of that information.
Oh yeah, they all do. I mean, that's the beauty of it. Like, if you're a pastor of a church or a priest or of the sort, you're allowed certain benefits that you don't have to declare on taxes. Like your housing is free.
Yeah.
I don't know if Joel Osteen pays for that house. I don't think he does because it's a multi-million-dollar home.
Right.
The church bought that house. It's and allows him to live in. There was another pastor. I'll have to look it up. It was he got caught embezzling a ton of money. His depositions on YouTube. I'll have to find that for you and send it to you.
I feel like I know what you're talking about. That was just not too long ago, too, right?
But do you really need an extended BMW? And he was like, well, yeah, we have to pick people up from the airport and stuff. And the attorney was like, you couldn't do that in a Ford Explorer?
Right. Like, come on, man. That extended BMW isn't, intended, like, it's not family capacity or something like that. Just come on and get a big old normal
and that's what separates those pastors, in particular those pastors in mega churches, that we really need to talk about the heart of the issue. They preach the concept of tithing, and they preach against the government, and they rail against taxes and this and that and the other, but here they are living at an income level 3, 4, 5 times the income level of their average parishioner.
Yep. Absolutely.
But because they didn't pay for it, it's okay.
Right. Yeah, definitely, because, it really isn't their money.
Right. And the thing is, I know, and somebody listening to your podcast is probably going to fire up and say, but, Trump got rid of the Johnson Amendment, and he didn't. Trump had no power to get rid of the Johnson Amendment. What he signed was an executive order saying not to enforce it or to go easy on enforcing it. Right?
Right.
But it can still be enforced. And I think if, the IRS were to seriously look at Pastor Smotherman and his church, he'd be owing a lot of money in taxes.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Because, I mean, I can't count off the top of my head how many, political rallies that they've had, Charlie Kirk, freaking,
Did you have Patrick Giesler or something down there?
Which
one?
one?
Was a different church. I thought Jason Kessler was out here at that church, but I guess he was somewhere else.
Oh yeah, no, he was. That was somewhere. I think that was somewhere in the valley, or was Scott Pressler or something like that.
Yeah, Scott Pressler, I think it was. Yeah, I can't remember it offhand. But the funny thing about that is, he brings all these people in, and he argues like, well, Temple Albert brought in, senatorial debates and this and that and the other. And yeah, Temple Albert does. They bring in political candidates to allow them to debate and answer questions among their congregants all the time. But they bring in both.
Oh, from both parties?
Yeah. From both parties.
Right.
And they'll allow them to set up an information booth in the back there. And, I don't know. I'll have to look it up really quickly. But I know when that started, Rabbi Black was over when he was at Temple Albert. I don't know if he's still there. But he was very, very... he made sure that that's how it happened. He always invited both parties or all three parties if we had an independent or a green in there. And they held their debate and they held their talk. And, that was it. But he never told his congregants who to vote for.
Right.
Smotherman breaks that rule.
Overtly, too. Like, he definitely was not hiding. He just said, you know what? I don't care. Go out and vote for such and such and... Screw Mayor Tim Keller.
Yeah, and he actually even talked about the fine later on. He talks about his Christmas pageant coming through, and he's like, yeah, we got fined $10,000 by the governor, and then they dropped it to $5,000.
And he said, well, we're not paying it. No, I'm not paying it, he said.
Yeah.
Like, oh my goodness, he just doesn't care.
I was like, but Romans tells you you have to.
Right. Yeah,
So,
these things
yeah,
don't matter to
it's
him.
crazy.
It's fucking wild. Well, in closing here, is there anything else that you would like to point out or say that maybe we might have missed?
You know, I just want to say that if we want to look at the concept of the Bible and how we use it in our daily lives, taking a literal translation is fine. But you need to modernize it a little bit. You know, I mean, if you're still eating, you know, your shrimp and lobster, you're sinning. If you're mixing, you know, your cottons and your polyesters, you're sinning. That's just the way it is. And pastors like you know, Pastor Smotherman over at Legacy Church, they're dangerous in their rhetoric. It's people and messages spread by Pastor Smotherman that result in things like the El Paso shooting. You know, when the gentleman walked into Walmart and killed however many people. It's dangerous. And quite frankly, it needs to be stopped. And the only way that I think it can be stopped is for his parishioners to actually read the Bible themselves.
Absolutely.
Whether it
And
be,
take a
you know,
time to
his
listen.
own version. Yeah, whether it be his own version, the amplified version that he uses. And I use that because, you know, reading through the comments in his little sermon I watched online, they seem to always quote from that particular Bible more than anywhere else.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I particularly, you know, that's why I pulled that version of the Bible up for this conversation.
And say again
even
what
within
version of that Bible is?
he preaches. Yeah, he's using what's called the amplified version,
Okay.
which is a translation of the New America version.
Okay.
The New America, or the American Standard Version, I'm sorry.
Perfect. Well, my friend, thank you so much.
So, yeah. So Smotherman needs to be stopped, and the only way it's going to be stopped is through education. And in order to do that, we cannot hate the sinner. We must educate them.
Absolutely. And know that there is, you know, redemption for them, right?
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Exactly. You know, I mean, even the worst people in the world can be redeemed. The question is, will you allow that to happen?
Absolutely.
You know, will we as a society allow it to happen, or will we fall into the same, you know, the same position that the followers of you know, Pastor Smotherman, going all the way back to, you know, or Reverend Witherspoon, Jonathan Witherspoon, from the 1700s or 1800s rather.
Yeah.
You know, this isn't the same country. This isn't the same country it was in 1800, you know, in 1865, or, you know, it's 2020, it's 2021. Things change. So do interpretations and meanings. And that's the way it's supposed to be.
Absolutely. Because, I mean, people evolve, things change, you know, and
Yeah, exactly.
resisting that and fighting it, it's I can't.
Oh, yeah, resisting change is a losing battle.
Yeah, you know, it definitely is, and but
you can
hopefully
resist all
one,
you want, but there are forces larger than you at work.
and hopefully we can win in, you know, showing people that it is time, way past time, for it to change, and because
Exactly.
I mean, regardless, it is, you know, but
Exactly, and thankfully, you know, we have your podcast and preachers like me and many, many others that are willing to stand up and tell these false prophets, no, you're not going to get away with it.
because, like you said, it's dangerous. It is very dangerous.
It is.
Because people will
It is.
they'll believe it. You know, like you mentioned earlier, it's the blind faith that people have, and I feel people like Steve Smotherman just they take advantage of it to very dangerous degrees, and it's definitely something for all of us to worry about. You know.
Yeah, Steve Smotherman is just like a poor man's grifter, really.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I'm fairly certain if he hears this, he'll probably chase down my Twitter account and call me everything but the Son of God.
I definitely wouldn't doubt it. Let's I definitely wouldn't doubt it.
But yeah, I welcome a debate with Pastor Smotherman or any other preacher of that particular faith or this
Please,
particular
if
sect.
somebody makes that offer, please give me a call.
That'd be awesome. That'd be awesome. I mean, you got my number, sir. So if somebody calls and said I want to do it, let me know.
Right on, preach. Right on. Well, again, thank you so much for joining and for being willing to, come on and decipher all of this with me. I appreciate it, and let's hope that.
Man, I appreciate you asking. Thank you.
Yeah, hell yeah.
Thank you.
I couldn't have had anybody
this was
better.
Great. And if you ever need me again, you know how to get a hold of me.
Right on. All right. Thank you so much.